they'll come back from Mexico. I'm sure it's one of you.
When you leave it?
I'm not going anywhere, that's how sad it is.
Oh.
I'm not happy about it either. Phil, do you want a copy of the slides?
You think I should? Yeah, I think that should happen.
Well, you can certainly, I got a couple extra copies.
Thanks.
I'm not doing all this today.
When you're back there.
Yes.
She's the one who gets to have a gun too.
Did
Yours
you
did?
see that? Okay.
Rick had trouble with theirs too, you know. Huh? Rick had trouble with theirs.
Oh, really?
Computer had, but I was babysitting the house today. I came in 15 minutes, took a while.
Got it to work?
It's all on warranty yet, so. Good job.
Yeah, this was not, 15 years old.
You know, it's all this computer thing. She went to wash clothes and it came up. You have to use your credit card to operate. He said, what? The water bill's not going up, probably, huh?
I'm good. Can you remember not to, I just up the door?
Hmm?
Can you close the door instead of sitting on it?
Barely hear it, so. There'll be a lot of those.
Yeah, whenever you're ready.
Good.
Whenever you wanna start.
All right, I'd like to call this meeting to order. Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. Second.
Number 4, we'll go into council training.
Okay. Come on in.
I don't know who's gonna start this off.
I will start it off.
Perfect.
So, you got a copy of the slides in your packet. I'm gonna go through some stuff, we're gonna kinda work together with Ashley and I, and then maybe Adam will chime in too. Don't be afraid to ask questions. If there's something that you want to know more about, this training is for you, so get as much of it as you can, get out of it as much of it you can, so. Just to start. Okay, this first one's for Public Works. Let's hope that doesn't happen yet.
Good job, Mark.
Yeah, and then when local governments don't update their technology. Why are residents reluctant to use the community parks? Sometimes we get a little excessive on our signage. When we go overboard, warning about potential dangers. So, just some funnies. So, just to start, general city information. So, Foley itself is structured as a statutory city, which means we have an elected mayor and council and appointed city clerk. The council appoints all personnel. So, some cities are structured where they have a city manager, some cities have a city administrator clerk. The difference is the hiring and firing authority. So, our city is set up where council retains all the rights to hire and fire individuals and hire the personnel. Basically that operates all the functions or the actions that you set forth. The council does appoint independent boards and commissions to advise the council on issues, and these are just boards and such and people to maybe take a deeper dive into things, give you some other thoughts, opinions, so that they can help you make that final decision or whatever is needed for the city to move forward. The council retains all administrative and legislative authority, but designates the day-to-day staff operations accordingly. So in other words, city administrator is your chief administrative official. Myself, along with our staff, do all the day-to-day that you basically set forth in ordinances, motions, and so forth. What is your role as an individual council member? Council members' statutory duties are performed by the council as a whole. So what's really important to remember is council members act as an entire governing body. You're limited in what you can do as an individual. You really speak together as a group when you make decisions. One of your most important responsibilities is to participate at council meetings. So you need to research issues, make and second motions, participate in discussion, and vote on matters. Make sure you prepare and read your packet. We try to give you your packet ahead of the time, give you at least 2-3 days to go through it. Talk to staff in advance about questions. This is one thing I know as department heads we really appreciate. If you have questions, you don't understand something, just need a bit more information, come talk to us. We're here to help you and give you the answers you need to make that decision. It can make your meetings run more efficiently. It can make you best prepared to make that decision. So do not ever hesitate to reach out and ask questions if you need more information. You really should be devoting your time to problems of basic policy and acting as liaisons between the city and the general public. So you make some of those ordinance decisions, motions, resolutions, and then you designate your staff to, okay, enforce this ordinance or, execute this decision. It's really important to focus on you being that higher level decision-making authority and then letting your staff handle the day-to-day and execution of those decisions. 2 city council members and the mayor or clerk may call a special meeting of the city council. We don't call a lot of special meetings, but from time to time they are needed. When that happens, you're gonna see an email or something come from me or just letting you know, hey, this is what's going on. We do have a posting requirement of 3 days for special meetings, so it's not usually something that's gonna happen right away. There are emergency meetings that can happen right away, but special meetings are either called by 2 members or the mayor and the clerk, and we will be communicating when that is needed and why. Anything else you want to add?
Special meetings are limited only to those agenda items that are set out in the meeting notice. That's the only thing I can think of in terms of special meetings.
Yeah. You good?
Before or after our regular meeting, correct? That was on the agenda. No, we had a meeting at the first of the month. If there's something on that agenda that we need to, or something has come up, then we could call. That's what you're
Right.
saying?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So your regular meetings are those that are laid out at the beginning of the year.
Yep.
And kind of predetermined. Anything outside of that's likely a special meeting.
Yeah, and staff, we try to be mindful of the cost and the time that we have into meetings, and we do it the best we can to keep things on our regularly scheduled meeting, but sometimes we just can't make it happen. Something needs to be decided sooner. Some additional items with the council's authority. Conducting elections within the city. You appoint staff and judges to run and administer those elections, but you are ultimately the authority to make sure those elections happen and, are conducted in an appropriate manner. Setting and interpreting rules governing its own proceedings. Exercising all the powers of cities that the law does not delegate to others. So as you know, there are things that are different from our state and federal government that we do at the local level. And you make ordinances and things and you execute those laws and ordinances and such at our level. Legislating for the city. We have an event coming up in a week from tomorrow, I think, where we're going down to the Capitol to work on the wastewater grant issue. Your job as an elected official is to keep close contact with our state and federal representatives to make sure we are getting what we need for our city. Directing enforcement of city ordinances, and we talked a little bit about that already. And then preparing the budget and levying taxes. So you ultimately approve the budget, you ultimately determine what we levy and what gets put forth out there to the residents and business owners of this community. Anything else? You appoint administrative personnel, transacting city business, you know, approving bills, all sorts of different things and decisions that have to be made every month, managing the financial operations, appointing members of the boards. We just did that last meeting. Conducting the city's intergovernmental affairs. We have obviously many relationships established with other government entities. Protecting the welfare of the city and its inhabitants. Serving as the board of review or delegating authority. We currently delegate some authority to the county for that action, but the council does have the right to act as a board of review and conduct that process if they so choose. Providing community leadership, and that's probably one of the most important things. You are that direct connection to our local residents and property taxpayers and business owners. You need to be there listening to them and, you know, putting forth decisions that represent what they want. Miss anything? No, just chime in otherwise. And then this is just kind of examples of some of the committees, you know, personnel, EDA, planning. Kudos to Bill who came for planning today. Awesome. And then there's always other ad hoc committees that we may set up if we have something going on and we just need a little bit more time and attention to the matter. We may set up a committee of 1 or 2 council members with staff or other individuals to help that process along. But it's most importantly, you as council members, do your research, ask questions, get as much information as you can as possible to make those decisions. And then the committee will help you with providing some additional information. The role of the mayor. Official head of the city, so the mayor conducts the meetings, the figurehead, the first person, you know, that we're gonna go to when it comes to certain things to represent the council. They're gonna sign documents. So a lot of the signatures on documents, you'll see the mayor, you'll see my signature. That's pretty common on most of the official correspondence that we have. I talked about conducting meetings, declaring local emergencies. This is one where the mayor may have a little bit more power and authority because the mayor can designate an emergency, and we actually had that happen a couple years ago with the COVID response. But usually what happens if the mayor has to make that declaration, a meeting will follow as soon as possible. So within a day or two or whenever we can get the entire council convened. It's really just a situation that needs an immediate response and something needs to happen right away. And so we had to do that with COVID and a couple other things, but then the council convened and had a discussion. Call special city council meeting, and it's also the council appointment tiebreaker if all other options are exhausted. And maybe I'll have maybe one of the attorneys explain how that, when that could come up. Because I know we talked about it at one point a couple years ago. Do you remember, Adam, or?
Well, you're gonna be appointing a vacancy, I believe, and so how that works is somebody will make a motion, somebody will make a second that, maybe there won't be a second. And I've had this happen a couple times, and it's usually with a vacancy appointment where everybody goes around the table and makes a motion for a candidate, and either there's not a second or it doesn't pass. And kind of once you've totally exhausted that and everybody just throws up their hands, then ultimately the mayor gets to step in and make that appointment. Most things you want to try and accomplish through consensus, but that's not always possible, especially when you've got a vacancy where you might have 2-2 votes. And so state law provides for this contingency for kind of that necessary tiebreaker.
Can the mayor motion or second any candidate?
Sure. So the mayor is a council member through and through, and so in any kind of situation, the mayor is free to make motion and second.
Thank you.
Yeah, and that's really too why having an odd number of members is important too. because you reduce the chances of that happening. Right. City staff, so, by statute, you have to have a city clerk, treasurer. So I'm a city administrator, clerk, treasurer. You have to, by statute, have that position in your city. We combine it, and that's very common in smaller cities to combine it. But it's just something to, remember, you have to have somebody that's able to do those day-to-day operations and execute those decisions on your behalf. And like I said, the council delegates the personnel management to, the city administrator, clerk, treasurer. But you guys make the final decisions on hiring and firing. So, typically what will happen in those instances, we obviously do performance reviews. We obviously do job interviews and applications, and the council will participate in some of those. Some of them they may not, but there's usually a process of a recommendation that will come forward by staff, whatever is appropriate for that level of position. But ultimately they run through this meeting.
Sarah, if I can just interject here too. So, although we're not official city staff, we're certainly a resource that can act with city staff as well. And what we want to do with city staff is really make the council look good. Our job is to prepare you guys so when you come to the meetings, you can feel educated and ready to conduct the city business in a professional way as well too. And so we're here to help you look good. And so how we can do that is by answering your questions. We just ask that you give them to us in advance so we have time to prepare, and we can all work together to accomplish that goal.
Exactly. And in addition, the council will set the salaries for employees, and we talk about that through the budget cycle each year and through our wage implementation plan. So, pretty straightforward. It's something that you've been doing and have seen if you've been on the council, and you will see if you're a new member. And here's just a simple organizational chart to help you understand. Obviously, you see the city council at the top, and then the city administrator, and then to one side is like the office, janitorial, pool manager, and then you also have our other major departments, which like the fire chief, public works, police chief, and then the positions within that department. And these are just a listing of our different positions, which I think many of you are familiar with, who we all have and who's all contributing to our operations. Communications. So this is one that has really, I think, become more important over the years, just with so much information going around with social media and all sorts of items. There's a lot of ways where people are exchanging information. It may not always be the best information. It can be a positive or negative impact on a city. And we've had our fair share of issues there, concerns with this. And these are just a few that I've pulled that I'm sure many of you remember. But what's most important about the communications, and you saw it in your packet, is really having a plan. When we address communications, we really want to have predetermined messages. We want to be very specific on our audience and how we respond. And a couple of the highlights that I think are most important is we don't want every council member providing their own comment or maybe response to something. When we have a crisis come up, we want to come out with a predetermined, 5-6 key points, unified response that, gives all the necessary information. And that's what we're really focused on with our communications plan. And a lot of times that will be facilitated through my office, myself, and the mayor, and then we will send that out to you as well. But what's really important is that we are very careful with how we respond to incidents, because if you say something you don't want to say, if some bad information gets out, it can really be difficult for us to recover from that. So whenever you're not sure how to respond, reach out. We have a great resource here with a communications background that has a way of crafting things that even I can't figure out sometimes, and we're happy to help you with that. We want to give you the correct information, all the information, and then give you those key talking points. like Ashley said, our job is to make you look good and make it easy for you. So don't hesitate to reach out. Make sure you're always, mindful of, information can spin quickly, and we want to be careful on what we're saying and how we're saying it. So just the one thing on this slide too is the public information officer is typically the city administrator or the mayor, and we will give some thought into a response as best as we can, and making sure that that's done appropriately. Do you have any other questions? I kind of gave you the whole communications plan so you can see who the key players are, what some of the outlets are. In addition to that, we also are really intentional about our messaging on our website and our social media, because we want to make sure the public is informed too. So it's not just the crisis communication, it's also about making sure we're letting the public know what's going on. And I think there's even other things listed in that spreadsheet that I have laying on the table here. Water billing messages, if we ever send out a mailing, how we can utilize that. We have lots of different outlets that we're using, so take a look at that. And if you have any other questions, I can certainly answer those. Otherwise, I'll get into the really fun stuff, which is the finances, and everybody loves that. I'll just go over kind of basic overview. Is there anything that you wanted on communications before
I think you covered it.
Okay, so generally speaking, the funds that we have in the city, and you see those when we do budget. We have general funds, which are like special revenue funds, like our our fire and pool. And they're special revenue funds because they do generate some revenue, but are supplemented by tax revenue. We have the debt service, so those are typically our bond funds. How we fund street improvement projects is what we mostly use it for. The capital project funds, street improvements, we also have some equipment, and that's just how we fund items in our CIP, or our capital improvement plan. And depreciation factors into those expenditures and such, so they're called capital projects. We also have proprietary funds, most commonly the enterprise funds is what you deal with, and that's the water and the sewer. And those funds ultimately are supposed to be self-sufficient. So we want to generate enough water and sewer revenue to cover our water sewer expenditures. It is not typical practice for us to be levying tax dollars to supplement those funds. Those funds really should have user fees to cover their costs to operate. And then the fiduciary funds, which are like your pensions and so forth. We don't deal a lot with those. We just have some mandated reporting with our state pension that you see during audit. The budget process, so that'll be coming up in no time, but we typically start that in the summer, and city staff will prepare a draft budget. We usually have a couple meetings at the department head level. We talk about, okay, what are we going to need, what's changed, what challenges are we having, so forth, and we'll put together a rough draft, and we'll present that to the council. And that will happen typically in August. We have the budget meeting. At that meeting, we will not only look at that line item budget, but we'll also talk about our priorities and goals. Maybe there's something, some ideas that came about from your discussion with the public that we want to incorporate. We'll talk about all sorts of different things. And then we also review our debt and investments at that time. And that's really something that we have done, particularly the last few years, to try to get the council more up to speed on what is happening with our investments and debt service. So it's important that we do that and review that with you so you can see what's going on each year. And then in September, we will set a preliminary levy. And that is basically the high figure or the tax levy that we are moving ahead with. And that's a combination. We usually look at the bottom line and you'll see levy increase this percent. We'll talk about tax capacity. That's how we spread it out. We'll basically make a decision, okay, this is what we need in the community to move forward based on this budget, and the council will consider that. Once that levy is set, we can't increase it, but we can lower it. And then that levy gets sent out on those preliminary tax statements that everyone gets that you usually get like in November before the, public hearings in December. October and November, we just do some further budget review if needed. Sometimes we're waiting on health insurance numbers. Sometimes we're waiting on some additional information on a project. And if that's the case, we can continue to review that budget and make adjustments if needed. And then in December is when that public hearing is scheduled, and that's usually the first meeting in December. So those TNT notices are what I referenced before, that everybody that's a property owner gets mailed to them that shows what their potential tax levy on their property will be. And then it also, now a new law that came into effect, it provides some summary budget data. But in December, we hold that public hearing, and the city council then grants final approval of the budget. And then the staff will forward that final approval to the county, and then also do the state reporting that's necessary for that. Anybody have any questions on that portion? It kind of starts in early summer and usually wraps up at the end of the year. Okay. And then in January, that's when the new budget cycle starts. So we run January 1st to December 31st is our fiscal year. We get tax payments, so the county sends us those tax dollars in July and December, and we get LGA payments in the last part of July and December. LGA is the state local government aid. That is a dollar amount that is determined by the state that the majority of Minnesota cities qualify for. When we do the budget cycle, you'll see a note on our levy will usually account for what we budget or anticipate will be received for local government aid. So that's just kind of the state's way of helping us out. I can't even remember what, I know I at one point knew how it came about to start, but it's been around for a long time.
I think it's a way to moderate some of the big discrepancies in property taxes based on community, like the park has high commercial, low residential versus some bedroom communities that don't have a lot of commercial.
Yeah. And I think our last, we were about 870 some thousand, I think was our last this past year, local government aid, but it fluctuates. I know it's always a hot topic you'll hear about at the state legislature because everybody's pushing for increases in LGA and you know, particularly so now with all the inflation costs that we're dealing with, so. All right. Debt limit. There is a statute that limits the amount of debt a city can incur, but the debt has to apply to it. When we issue some debt, like our GO street bonds or GO backed bonds for street reconstruction projects, that wouldn't count towards it. But basically what this statutory limit does is it just prevents a city from issuing all sorts of crazy debt you know, that maybe is not in the best interest fiscally of the city. I don't know how many cities ever come about, but it does exist. I don't know how many cities actually hit it, but it does exist, and it would basically limit us on the size of our city, how much debt we can issue. It's not anything to worry about at this point. We don't have anything that applies to it right now, so it's just something to be mindful of. We usually do bonding is what we do, and we obviously did our PFA loan, but bonding, we have a couple different kinds, and the one we use is general obligation, special assessment. So we issue bonds or debt. We will have the project, will determine like an amount of special assessment is what we usually have with street projects. And then whatever else, we pledge the taxing authority of the entity to that debt. So we have to levy so many dollars every year to pay for that debt. And by pledging the general obligation of the city, that's what the creditors look at, because when we are pledging that, we are saying no matter what, we're gonna go to the taxpayers to pay this. You know, if needed, we're gonna go back if we need more money. It's pledged and assured by our ability to tax. So that's typically what we use for our bonding. There are some other options. Revenue bonds, those are typically like for enterprise funds. You're pledging the future revenues or the revenues you're anticipating to receive. We have refunding. We have done that. Refunding is basically refinancing. In our case, we may have an opportunity, call bond, refinance it at a lower rate. We just did that, it was 2018, like 3-4 years ago. Saved us some money. We also have a street reconstruction bonding. This is where you determine, you have to come up with a street plan, and you go through a process that basically, on that street plan, you're gonna issue bonds. It's kind of a weird bonding process because it can be subject to a reverse referendum, based on it. We don't use it, we usually use the GO, bonds, but it is another option, if cities would choose to do a different route to finance their projects. And then there's conduit bonds. I've done these before, but not here. And this basically is where another entity will utilize the city's like tax or credit rating to issue bonds. The ones I did were healthcare facilities, another entity. It doesn't impact the city, but they can use the city's credit rating to issue their own bonds. It's kind of a weird situation. Like I said, we haven't done it here. It would be something still that you would be aware of if we were to do it. It's just another option. Anything else? Oh, okay. These are just some tidbits. Political straight talk, just some things to keep in mind. It is better to promise to investigate than to promise to act. It is better to say, if other council members will go along with me, than to say, I will get your zoning changed. You act as a group of 5, not as an individual, so be mindful of that. It is better to say, let me see what I can do, than to say I can do. It is better to speak about the larger picture than about specific citizen demands until you have the facts. It is better to say I don't know what can be done than to promise action when you are not sure. This one I like to use too. It is better to blame official constraints, state law, federal law, court decisions, than to say you can do what is beyond your ability. And it's in what we do that comes into play a lot, so keep that in mind. Sometimes we don't have a choice.
Joke that we get paid to be the bad guy, so you can blame the lawyers.
Yeah, blame the lawyers, that's another one. It is better to say no than to say yes and have to make an excuse as why not. It's better to be realistic about getting half a loaf than to be idealistic about getting the whole loaf. It is better to say I haven't made up my mind than to tactfully support any and every demand by constituents. So just some things to think about. You will have people that will, question you and bring a lot of, very valid concerns and ask some hard questions. So it's just good things to keep in mind. I think I'm going to turn it over to
I think so.
Ashley.
So we'll get right into the types of council meetings. Now, we already discussed one type of council meeting, which would have been the special meeting. And you've already actually had one of the meetings too, is the annual meeting. So the annual meeting is the first meeting of the year that the council holds. And it's at that meeting that you designate the official newspaper where notices of the council will be published. You elect an acting mayor. So in the event that the mayor cannot be present, the acting mayor will fill in the mayor's shoes. You select an official depository, designate bank account signatories, and then other thing that often happens at this meeting too is that a fee schedule is set. Now, it doesn't have to occur at this first meeting, but it oftentimes seems like it's a good starting point to set the fee schedule for the year as well. But that can be done at any time throughout the year, so don't feel like it's limited to the first meeting. Then we have regular meetings, and these regular meetings are really the predetermined meetings. They occur on the first Tuesday of the month, and then the third Tuesday of the month for Foley as needed as well. And I know Sarah will communicate with you accordingly when they are needed. And you usually do meet a lot of times the first and third, don't you?
Just the first,
Okay.
the third only when needed.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't usually like to have any more meetings than we need to. Just,
Who wants to be
but if
sick
it's
here?
busy, it's busy.
Yeah.
I would just say, we talked about the agenda for special meetings, that you're locked in once that notice goes out. For regular meetings though, you can add items during the meeting, so you're not constrained by, just what's on the posted agenda beforehand.
Okay. Then we get to adjourned meetings. So adjourned meetings occur when the meeting needs to be postponed to a future time for a lack of a quorum, which may happen if other council members aren't present, convenience, or complete pending business from a regular meeting. So essentially at this meeting, what you'd want to do is continue to a set time and set place when you are adjourning that meeting. Then we'd have special meetings like we talked about. It does require 3 days notice, and this would be a meeting to discuss something of importance. So something might have come up in the interim that needs to be addressed immediately and cannot wait till the next regular meeting, or it's a follow-up that obviously needs to be addressed too. And as Adam previously mentioned, the topics that can be discussed at the special meeting or limited to the agenda items. And then there's emergency meetings. Those meetings deal with natural disasters, so hopefully we won't have to encounter any of those anytime soon.
Adam, I have a question about the adding items to agenda. Anybody can do that at any time during the meeting? Or does that have to be a motion?
The protocol is generally to, ideally talk to the mayor ahead of time. The mayor is in charge of the agenda, but if it's something that comes up, you can make a motion to add whatever item to the agenda. Sometimes, the agenda gets published on Thursday or Friday, and you might have an amended agenda sitting, waiting for you on the dais. That's perfectly acceptable way to add stuff to the agenda too, if staff have some lead time kind of between when the agenda goes out and when the meeting starts.
No, sure, if you want to pull it up, we touched on how important it is to be present at the meeting so we can discuss the issues. And a popular option that has come up in recent years is remote attendance. So before I get into the requirements, I know Sarah has a fun little clip here.
That you need to be careful of.
For this one, you may have seen the term cat lawyer trending on Twitter overnight, and it's all thanks to a viral video. If you haven't seen it, check out what happened when an attorney showed up to Zoom court. I believe you have a filter turned on in the video settings. You might want to take a look. Can you hear me, Judge? I can hear you. I think it's a filter. It is, and I don't know how to remove it. I've got my assistant here. She's trying to, but I'm prepared to go forward with it. I guess a lot of it's not. I'm not a cat.
Even though,
watch your filters.
yes. So if you are going to attend a meeting remotely, first, as Sarah said, watch your filters. We don't want any mistaken cats at a meeting. But there are some requirements. The first one is that you do need to use interactive technology per statute that controls these remote meetings. And interactive technology really is technology that allows you to see what's going on in the meeting and allows meeting participants here to see you. So Zoom, WebEx, Teams would be considered interactive technology. It's important to communicate though with city staff if you're going to use this type of technology, because one, we want to make sure that it's set up in council chambers ahead of time and that we're all on the same platform, so we're not trying to juggle which each person is using or things like that as well. Then additionally, when you are remote, members at all locations need to be able to hear you and see one another at all times during the discussion. So you want to make sure that your camera is always on and that there's no filters. So I know Adam and I had a discussion earlier that would a cat filter count as being present at a remote meeting? I don't think it would, because the participants can't really see you, but some may differ. So hear you and see you, and then at least one member of the council needs to be present at the regular meeting here in the council chambers. All the votes would need to be conducted by roll call, meaning the mayor would have to call out each of the council members' names individually and asking if they support the resolution or ordinance in the affirmative or negative. And this is often a concern for some people, is that each location where a member of the body is present needs to be open and accessible to the public. So that means if you are participating remotely from your home, you would potentially need to open up your home to the public to be present as well too. So that's just something to be aware of when you are planning to attend a meeting remote. Is this something you really want to utilize to be open to the public? The city also needs to publish notice of the regular meeting location, so that the regular meeting would be occurring here, and then of remote locations as well too. So I'll go back to the example of being remotely present in one's home. Your home address would then need to be published that you are going to be attending the meeting from there.
Do we have the capabilities to even do this?
Well, you know, there are capabilities to do that, but that is a concern, is
I mean,
how well
am I gonna set a laptop up here so that I can see the audience when I'm not here? Or I mean, you said everyone has to be able to see both ways.
Yep.
We'd put you on the big screen like I have been a couple times, but
Okay.
yeah, I mean, it's not easy. Takes a little bit of work and
Mhm.
logistics to set up, which is why it's important to let us know if you need
Yeah.
to do that.
Okay.
And so, and really, we would encourage you to be here present, but we just want to make you aware that this is an option as well too. And as I said, there's two major concerns, and we've touched on them. You know, do you want your home potentially to be open to the public, and then would the technology work as well? So those are things to just be mindful of.
And it's an option if something, somebody had some extenuating circumstance and this allowed them to still participate, maybe that they couldn't, it's an option then, at least, that we could try to
Mhm.
set up for a person.
This has changed over the years though, correct?
During COVID, there were different rules that were adhered to. So these are the rules that are required now because we're no longer in a peacetime emergency.
And the pre-COVID talked about interactive TV instead of the interactive technology, and they cleared up that definition. It was less clear how you could do this and comply with the law than it is now. It's pretty commonplace now, and so I think everybody has a pretty good grasp and consensus that, Zoom, if I'm sitting on my laptop with a camera, in a hotel lobby where the address has been posted, that complies as long as here in City Hall, everybody can see me. So, yeah, it used to be much less common, but COVID changed a lot of things.
Okay.
Oh, and then lastly, the minutes need to reflect the reason for the remote appearance too. So another thing to be mindful of is that the reason that you're not present may be made public. Got that? So now that we covered attendance, we want to talk about meeting procedure and process. So it is important to follow procedure and processes because that's really what helps make the meetings efficient and run as quickly as possible. I mean, as Sarah touched on, not everyone wants to be here if they don't need to be. So to help with the timing of meetings, we can follow the process and procedure setup. And the city of Foley has established some procedure for council meetings and outlined it in Chapter 1, Section 100 of its city code. So that's always a good reference to turn to too if you have questions. And after, once we're here though, we need to make sure we have a quorum. That's often the first question that people will ask is, do we have a quorum? So a quorum for the city of Foley would be 3 people because that is the majority of council members. That is defined by city ordinance as well too. So 3 people are here, we do have a quorum, and because there's a quorum, the open meeting law would therefore apply. And that's often a meeting law that city staff will very closely monitor. And when we're talking about open meeting laws, a good way to think about this law is referring to it as the sunshine law. So the purpose of this is that we want to conduct city business out in the open for everyone to see and to be a part of. So out and open in the sunshine. So just think of it that way if you ever have questions. And it really just ensures that no meetings are conducted in secret, that the public is informed, and that they have an opportunity to be heard and present. So when we talk about sending out notices too, that goes with the open meeting law. cities are required to send notice out that a meeting will be heard to invite the public to be present with the meeting as well. As I stated, if there's a quorum, we will have to follow the open meeting law, but there are some limited exceptions where we can close a meeting. And those include labor negotiations, especially when we're negotiating with unions, performance evaluations, but the employee does have to consent to the meeting being closed, attorney-client privilege material, purchase or sale of a property, security reports, non-public data, and misconduct violations. If there's a situation that arises where a meeting would be closed, you can certainly look to Sarah or one of us to help with their procedures, because there are certain steps we need to follow to close a meeting. So it's not automatic that it's just closed. We'll have to state on the record why we're closing it and move forward that way. So we will help guide that process as well too.
And all closed meetings except the attorney-client exception do need to be tape recorded.
And usually what we do on the agenda, a lot of times we'll reference the statute or why we're closing the meeting, because a lot of times we know in advance we need to discuss certain things. So that's why you see that on there, so that the public can also go back to find why or what qualifies it.
The open meeting law, though, often comes in question when we're talking about email communications or interactions over social media too. And this is sometimes when we inadvertently could potentially violate the open meeting law over email communications too. So to start it out, what we want to remind everyone is don't hit reply all in emails, because then that could trigger the open meeting law, because a quorum of the city council is discussing city business. So we want to be careful with that. Now, sometimes city staff may reach out to a counselor individually, but that does not give that counselor the okay to then conduct more further discussion with the full council without being present here. And then we also want to talk about serial meetings too when we talk about these email and electronic communications. So if one council member reaches out to the second and the second reaches out to the third council member just to try to avoid the open meeting laws, that could still be a potential violation of the open meeting laws if that happens habitually too, especially. So courts will look at that and say, okay, we know what you're doing. You're trying not to comply with the law. You're trying to sidestep it. You can't do that. So it's best just to refrain from trying to stop that or to engage in that communication, and just to limit communication outside of council meetings as well too.
You should know there are, consequences for violating the open meeting law. There's a fine that the city can't pay for you, that you have to pay yourself. And if you commit 3 open meeting law violations, you can be removed from your seat. That is one of the very few ways that elected officials can actually lose their seat in Minnesota, is by violating open meeting law multiple times.
If I can just add to, if there's something that you can communicate to me. Like, whenever there's something out there and you want to respond to me as your staff person, and then I'll work the appropriate channels to communicate with the entire council. But you not reply all. It's okay to reply to me, talk to a staff member. That's corresponds between individual council member and staff. That's okay.
And when we talk about open meeting laws, though, there are sometimes instances where they wouldn't apply, and that may be where a quorum is present outside of meetings at social events. So if everyone is invited to the same birthday party, as long as city business would not be discussed, the city would not need to post notice that a quorum would be present at this location, and then the open meeting law would not apply. However, if we think there is going to be discussions of city business, we'd like to err on the side of caution and post anyway. So I know Sarah mentioned that there will be a tour of the Capitol coming up. We'll likely post notice for that just to let the public know that, hey, a quorum's going to be present. Sometimes when training is occurring, we'll post for that as well, or other city events. So if you ever have a question, or if you ever think that there's going to be a quorum, it's best to let Sarah know, and we'll likely post it just to be safe anyway.
And it's not hard to do if you let me know. It's super easy to post.
Is there anything with compensation there if you're attending meetings?
When it comes to the open meeting law, it wouldn't necessarily cover compensation.
Okay.
So that's often covered in a separate ordinance that the city would set. another important thing to do at meetings is preserve order. This will help with the efficiency, and I know we keep going back to efficiency, but this is one of the main ones. So really, it's the whole council's job to help preserve order. But the mayor will often be looked to as the guide to help do this. So to preserve order, we would advise to stick to the agenda items. You know, if agendas are not followed, it can be easy to get off track and get confused on what we're actually discussing, or even potentially what motions are we voting on, or what's going on if we don't stick to that agenda. So that is about the easiest way you can preserve orders, by sticking to the agenda. And then it's also necessary to follow procedure to help the mayor rule on questions of order as well too. You know, if there's a question on when a vote should be taken, on who made the motion or who should make the second too, all this will help in being more efficient in the meetings as well. And you know, they mentioned on here calling members of the council or public to order if they're being unruly. Now hopefully it doesn't come to this, but you certainly can use your gavel. You know, I was joking with Adam that I read an article recently that they joked that used to just be a desk ornament, but now it's actually becoming an effective tool when crowds can get a little bit unruly, to get people's attention and to bring them back to what's actually being discussed. And so hopefully it's not needed, but certainly use it if necessary to bring everyone's attention back. And then the mayor, along with the opening a meeting, will also have the ability to declare when a meeting is recessed or adjourned. Now, a recessed meeting is essentially just taking a break during the regular meeting. So if there needs a break for whatever reason, you would recess that meeting and then come back. An adjourned meeting is ending the meeting, and then at that time we stop talking about city business too, and that's the important thing. And why it's included here in open meeting laws, because when we're stopping the meeting, we're saying, okay, we're no longer discussing city business, the open meeting laws do not apply. If we would continue to discuss city business even after an adjourned meeting, we could still be subject to the open meeting laws.
Just reiterate again, you know, Sarah's role, our role, your staff's role is to help guide you through the process of governing the city. And so when meetings start to spiral, it is 100% appropriate to look to your staff for some guidance, direction, suggestion. I mean, collectively, we've all been through a lot of tough meetings, and we're here to help kind of get stuff back on track if stuff starts to fall off the rails.
So, like we do when we start our meetings, we use Robert's Rules of Order. That is our guide, and that is our bottom line, correct?
Yes. I'll be honest, the Robert's Rules of Order are both good and bad. It is a helpful guide that, hey, we're gonna follow the agenda, we're gonna make motions and seconds and then have discussion before we vote. I have seen the rules be abused, and you know, particularly if you have a council member who is really there to throw a wrench in things, it can become a tool for people to make objections, and then meetings get drawn out and contentious. And so, yes, you follow the Robert's Rules of Order, but I would say for most meetings pretty loosely. You know, if you have a really contentious topic and you've got a room full of people who are very passionate and want to speak on a public hearing, then I think, you know, skew to the side of following those rules more closely so that people aren't speaking out of turn. But Foley is not St. Paul. You don't need to have rigid rules in order to get things done. And so there's a little bit of a finesse to that.
It's just been brought up in the past where people wanted to speak during the meetings.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think actually we'll talk a little bit about that and about preserving order that, you know, starts with the mayor, but ultimately that's the full council's obligation to ensure that the agenda stays on track and isn't allowed to be hijacked by people sitting in the audience.
So that's actually a nice segue then to the public comment sections. So thank you. But the city does offer a time for members of the public to come and give their opinion essentially to the city council. Now, they do not have a right, citizens do not have a right just to interject at a council meeting at any time they want. Now, they have a right to be present, but they do not have a right to necessarily speak at a council meeting, so that's important to remember. And the city allows members of the public to speak during this open forum. I know you guys would introduce the open forum at the beginning of the meeting by stating that, you know, if any members of the public are here to address an item not on the agenda, they can do so at the open forum. And I believe time frames are set, and we ask them to sign in as well too. And that just helps in preserving order as well. If someone would try to talk during a non-public forum or an open forum time, you could certainly say, you know, we see that your hand is raised, or we see that you're trying to talk, but you would need to reserve your comments for the open forum. It's best not to engage in conversation, because again, that's where the meetings can get sidetracked very easily and can last much longer than necessary oftentimes.
The only reason this is contentious is it was brought up, and you could say point of inquiry, or if you had a question, or like you couldn't hear the question or what was being
Yeah.
talked about, and they would raise their hand, and you can ask at that point, not just interrupt them, correct?
So-
With respect to the council or the public, or?
The public, if,
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, you know, again, there's a bit of an art to this.
Yeah.
And so the mayor obviously is the person who gets to decide whether to acknowledge somebody, and the council can certainly make a motion and override the mayor. But yes, if you're getting the sense that maybe they're just not understanding things,
Yep.
it's okay. It's not necessarily a hard and fast rule, but you certainly don't wanna get in the habit of letting anybody in the audience who's got an opinion they wanna blurt out to do so.
I think the other thing too is whether they can make motions from, as an audience member, and that's
Oh,
not really
no.
appropriate. That's for the council. Yeah, okay.
Before we move on to, Sarah touched on this with her political straight talk, but when someone does address the council and ask a question or gives a comment, sometimes it's best just not to give a direct answer. It's best to say, you know, we'll look into that, we'll direct our staff to investigate. And that just helps set expectations appropriately. We don't want to tell a citizen that we're going to do something if we can't do that, or if we don't have all the facts of the situation too that could affect it. So sometimes just being non-responsive could be the best route to go.
And sometimes people wanna talk about a very personal issue that's just not appropriate for public discussion, so sometimes a staff member can maybe talk to that person out in the hallway, or give them their business card to talk to them during the day, something like that.
So moving on to ordinance, resolutions, and motions. So first, I want to touch on the difference between an ordinance and a resolution. So a resolution is essentially a written expression of an approved motion. And it can often be done to approve a contract or record findings of facts. Whereas an ordinance is the regulation. It's essentially the city's law of regulating people or property. So those are the two major differences when we come to, will we enact a resolution or an ordinance? Those are often the topics we'll refer to. And then either an ordinance or a resolution will typically begin with a motion as an oral expression, as a rule, or a matter of rule. And so any council member can make a motion that they would like to approve this ordinance. It's usually followed by a discussion, and then second, and then the final vote. Now, when passing an ordinance or a resolution, it is usually required that a quorum or a majority of the council members vote in the affirmative, but sometimes we do need four-fifths or the supermajority. And that can be for things like a vacation of a street or summary publication as well too. So when we go back to, you know, why we were encouraged now the council members to attend, this is really wise, because we want to make sure we can conduct city business, and if not everyone is in attendance, we may have issues getting the necessary votes to pass certain resolution or ordinances.
Can I just verify, does anybody have any questions on, like, the motions themselves? I mean, like, we run a pretty, you know, relaxed
Yeah.
motions and seconds, but is there any questions on that? Cause they would be better equipped to answer those than I am sometimes on some of those specific motions. We don't use a lot of them, but if there's any questions all the
Because
time.
we always, if there is an issue, we ask if we need a motion or not.
You know, but I'm just wondering, like, does everybody understand what a roll call vote is? Does everybody understand, like, what a point of order, like,
Yep.
those type of things? Is there any questions on that? Okay. Cause I don't wanna go over that, so.
Yeah. Now moving on to conflict of interest. And this is always something to be mindful of as we're operating city business. So just generally, gifts are prohibited. We can't accept gifts from individuals. And a lot of times we'll see conflicts of interest when it comes to contracts as well, too. Because we cannot have a financial interest in the contract, whether directly or indirectly. And there are certain limited exceptions to that, but mainly across the board, we cannot have financial interest in that. And now when we talk about conflict of interest, there really are two types of conflicts: the actual contracts or statutory outline contracts, and then conflicts that could give the appearance of a conflict of interest too. So now the statutory ones are the ones that are more easy to define, are contractual and non-contractual contracts. We talked on with the contract. So like we said, a contract is generally anyone who has the authority to take part in any sale, lease, or contract in their official capacity cannot voluntarily have a personal financial interest in that sale or lease or any type of land dealing with that. And then you cannot have an indirect interest as well too, and this may come up when, for instance, if an LLC is involved. So if an LLC is purchasing land but an individual is the sole owner of the LLC, that would be an indirect conflict of interest because you would be benefiting financially from that sale to the LLC, even though your name might not be on the contract. In reality, you would be benefiting from that as well too. And then the non-contractual would just be essentially if there's any sort of economic or any financial interest that an official would have in a dealing, that they cannot participate in that action. And we would often look at this on a case-by-case basis as well too, to see if there was a conflict present or not.
You don't get to vote on your conditional use permit application. You have a conflict and need to abstain from that. I mean, those are the, land use is probably the primary situation where you're gonna run into something other than a contract.
I'll add though, you know, the contracts and anything that impacts the financial side, we get asked about that during audit, and you might even get asked about it every year. So it is something that we have to disclose or be mindful of because they do check those things.
And sometimes I have council members ask about, okay, we have this street project coming through. I'm on the project, I'm gonna get assessed, can I participate? And the answer is yes. If the decision in front of you is a broad application, then you don't have this, you know, particularized conflict. Now, if you're the only property being assessed, then yes, you probably do have a conflict. But just like an ordinance is gonna apply to everybody in the city and you get to participate in that, kind of same principle. So that's maybe one area where sometimes we tend to get questions on whether or not someone has a conflict.
And then I just want to touch on the appearance of a conflict too. So if there's any reason that your relationship to another person or their relationship to you would undermine the job you're doing or that they're doing on any board, for example, like the EDA or the Planning Commission, that should give us pause to evaluate, is there a conflict present or not? And these aren't always clear cut. There's often not any statutory reference that we can turn to say, because of X, you cannot do this. But it's just something to be mindful of. I know I faced it myself too. So an example would be like, I live in Sauk Rapids. My husband was asked to be on the Planning Commission, and we represent them. So even though there's nothing that directly prohibits him from being on the Planning Commission, because how we work closely with the Planning Commission and the council at times, if he's on it, that could just create the appearance of a conflict at times as well.
It's really an integrity issue, and you know, making sure that there's no reason for anybody to question the decision of the council. And so I would say generally, communication with our office flows through Sarah. Conflicts are probably the one exception where if you call us directly, we will talk through whatever that ethical concern might be, so that you can make an informed decision. So if you do have a question, certainly go to Sarah. You can come to us. These are important things that are just essential for having the city put its best face forward to the public, and so that people don't have their confidence undermined.
So lastly, it's important to know that we have to make a decision when we get a resolution or ordinance before them. And as Sarah said, you work as a group, so the council will vote as a group on whether to move forward with the decision or not. And you can often do that together by seeking information and then asking questions beforehand, but you always have to keep in mind that what you're doing needs to be in the best interest of the community and the city. And now you will not always necessarily agree on the outcome of a vote. And that happens, and that can create for some discussion later on too. But it's important to be respectful when you're not on the majority side of the vote too. If people approach you in public and ask you, you can certainly say, you didn't vote in favor of this, but the council did as a whole, so we need to move forward with this. And that just creates more of a united front, and it also helps city staff who have to enforce an ordinance or a resolution too. If we know that the council and anyone really is not undermining the work that needs to be done to enforce that as well. Oh yeah. Yeah, so, we talked about how important the open meeting law was, and I would say this is equally as important that city staff and us as the legal representatives worry about too, is the Minnesota Government Data Practices Act. So this act is a series of state laws that attempt to balance the public's right to know information of what is going on with the city and the right to privacy and the government's need to function responsibly and efficiently. Now, there's different classifications of government data too, and classifications can change, but essentially any data collected will become government data, and the city does have an obligation to preserve data as well. Now, most data is public, so if individuals request it, oftentimes the city can disclose that data, but there's times that they are not. So if you receive a request for any type of data, it's important to forward it to Sarah or another city staff member so we can ensure that it is properly documented that this is requested, and we can actually properly analyze, is this public data? Because some data is private or confidential, and there are some very serious penalties if we would violate the statute as well too. And to give you an example of why it's important to analyze data, it can change. So police reports, for example, sometimes they're considered confidential or non-public when they're in investigation, but when the investigation over and the case is concluded, then they could become public data. But if the content of the incident report can deal with certain crimes like sexual assault, then it remains confidential. So that is why city staff needs to look at the data before it's distributed to know, is this really public data? And another thing that we always worry about is personal data is really the biggest liability for the city. Now, it's typically not public data, the personnel data of city employees. So the best thing to do is just not talk about personnel or city employment information. If you receive requests, refer it to the city administrator. And it's very easy, I think, to blur the line sometimes, even if you don't intend to. So you can be talking about someone about snow plowing, and all of a sudden someone wants to talk about a job performance of one of the snow plow drivers. And that's not something we can disclose. That's not necessarily public data. So it's important to be mindful that if you receive information in the course of your role as a counselor about any employees, you really should refrain from talking about it, whether it's at the coffee shop or at the grocery store or anything like that. If anyone has any concerns, you can certainly refer them to Sarah, and she can address them appropriately as well too.
And it's somewhat, seems kind of tedious, but we have to get a form. So if somebody asks you, to get some information, we have the data request form on our website. We run everything through the form, every police report request, everything. And that's just what we have to do by policy. So You can always refer to our website too, the policy and the form is available there. And that's just, it's really not that hard a lot of times, it's just a one-page simple request. Most of it's, a lot of times we get it's public, you know, but we have to make that determination.
So moving on to social media accounts, we talked about this when it comes to open meeting laws, but this also applies to government data as well too. Now, many times there is the desire to use social media as a way to connect to constituents, but depending on what you are talking about, can then open up all your social media accounts or all your personal email accounts then too, to disclosures if necessary. So if you are using a personal social media account to comment on city business, instead of just referring a question or a comment to a city website or to a city official, that is when it opens up to this government data, because it has to be fully open for the public. And when we say that we want to take this seriously, is that because if we would ever become in a lawsuit where we need to disclose this, and you are discussing city business on, Facebook or Instagram, we could potentially have to disclose all those posts or all those messages on Facebook or Instagram, and that also goes for personal email accounts as well too. So if you haven't already done so, we would encourage you to open up a separate email account that you're just going to conduct city business on, so that way you don't have to disclose any personal information that may be contained on a personal email account.
I think some of the similar situations apply to text message from
Yep.
my discussion with the
Any
league.
Yeah.
communication.
Yeah, so it's also just something to keep in mind that, your texts could also be subject to disclosure. I know the league did a huge, loss control visit on this a few years back.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of even staff communications, we use text all the time, so.
City of Greenfield, I think, is the poster child for how things go really badly when council members were doing stuff by text, and then you have, people do personal things on their emails and cell phones, and, not always stuff you want aired out in public.
Moving on to planning and zoning. This is often a big source of information that people will come to the council on. So the state law does authorize cities to regulate land use, and it's often done through three major ordinances or ways of regulation, and that would be the zoning ordinance, the subdivision ordinance, and then the city plan, or the comprehensive plan, the comp plan. So the zoning ordinance is really regulation of the use and performance standards of certain zones within the city. We'll have a residential zone, an industrial zone, and an agricultural zone as well too. And we'll regulate how certain uses can be done within those districts and potentially setback requirements. This is all laid out in the ordinance, so if you have questions, certainly refer to that or refer individuals to, hey, look at our city ordinance. It will clearly spell it out for you. The website does a good job of being very accessible, so that's the easiest way, is just to go look at the zoning ordinance itself. And then when it comes to the subdivision ordinance, it's also easily laid out though too in the ordinance. And the subdivision deals with when we want to subdivide or take a piece of land off of an existing piece of land to make two or more smaller lots as well too. But there are certain requirements that we often require of developers or individuals when they want to do this, to ensure that the city is growing in an efficient manner, that we're not going to have a bunch of small lots right next to each other that could create congestion problems as well too. So that is why we would ask for certain submittals like a plat or sometimes a development plan as well too, so we can know what is happening with this subdivision and what is the overall plan for what's going to happen with this.
Yeah, and I would, if you get questions on, and reference the website, but also, that's where you can send them to me. That's a lot of what I do. And, with, time on the planning commission, and sometimes it's harder to get yourself up to speed on that, cause it just takes a while. But don't hesitate to reach out. We're happy to send people information. It's very typical when we get a request for something that we follow up with an email. Here's the application process, here are the links to the website. It's important for them to get all that information, and then they know exactly what to expect. And don't be discouraged that you can't remember all of it, because it's a lot. It is
Mhm.
really a lot, and even I have to go back and check it all the time, because I'm not sure what applies to what district and what area and so forth, so. Website, but don't hesitate to send them to our office, we handle those inquiries all the time.
And then lastly, the plan or the comprehensive plan is really just the layout of the goals for the city. How do we want the city to grow, and what do we want to accomplish, either industrial-wise or business-wise, in the city in the next coming years too. So that can be amended and changed as time goes on, but we like to look to the comprehensive plan when we're planning out different city developments.
And we just did the land use plan, that was one of the updates that we just worked through, and that's also, you know, a good reference point for you as council members to see what we kind of envision. Our comp plan's a little dated, but that land use plan is recent.
So now, how do all of these planning and zoning topics relate to the council as a whole? And they'll really become before you when there's requests, first for variances. Now, variances are requests to make changes or to act in certain ways that don't necessarily adhere to the zoning ordinance. Now, they can only be dimensional though, so they can only be a request for a variance that instead of a 25-foot setback, I would like a 20-foot setback. State law does not require us to do use variances. So if a certain type of use isn't allowed in a zoning district, that individual cannot come before the council and ask that a variance be granted to that for that use. That would not be allowed. You'll also hear conditional use permits, or CUPs as they're most commonly called, and a conditional use is a land use in a city, land use that the city permits in a zoning district only when appropriate measures are agreed to by the developer. So the city may ask for certain requirements be met in their landscaping or development or lighting that are all part of the CUP, that before that contractor or builder can start building, they will need to be ensured that they follow it as well too. And oftentimes these will include site plan reviews, so the developer will provide the city a plan of how they want to develop a certain area of land, and that can include a variety of things like landscaping, where the buildings are going to be, where the lighting's going to be, if there's any signage, how close that might be to a road. And so those would be available for you to review. And that would also be included in plats. And you'll often see the plats with the subdivisions. So the plats would lay out how the land is going to be subdivided. So if you have one parcel, the plat will show, okay, this is how many different parcels are going to be coming out of this subdivision. And then the council will also need to deal with annexations. And currently, there is an annexation process going on because we do have the joint planning board with Gilmanton Township. And essentially with that joint planning board, what we're doing is working with their representatives and cooperating on zoning and land use issues. So this is often seen when an area of the city wants to, or an area outside the city eventually wants to become part of the city. A joint planning board will be created so that the city and that area can work together to try to create a more smoother transition as different areas start developing and coming into the city.
And, you know, the planning and zoning stuff can get, you know, I guess a little bit overwhelming, and it's a lot of stuff, but that's why you have a wonderful planning commission that actually we'll talk about.
Yes.
That really, the advisory board that really helps the council through that process.
Yes. So the planning commission is appointed by the council. So members to the planning commission will be appointed through you. And as Sarah said, they're an advisory board. So they're not the final decision makers, but they will provide you with a recommendation on how they would suggest that the council should vote. And their role primarily is to look very closely at the subdivision ordinance, at the comprehensive plan, and at any other ordinances that would be applicable in the zoning to decide, you know, is this land development that's being proposed agreeable with our ordinance and comprehensive plan? And they will often go through line by line, you know, through the ordinance, this is why this is a good idea, or this is maybe why it's not advisable. And so when you get those recommendations, you know, use it as a tool. The planning commission is there to hopefully save you time and some energy too, by saying, you know, we've already put a lot of effort into this for you to look at, and this is how we're advising you as well too. And then just overall, when it comes to planning and zoning, the development process typically works when a developer will submit a preliminary plot, which is, here is what we're hoping to accomplish in this plat, it's not necessarily final, outlining what they want to do in that development or particular parcel of land. So that plat then is referred to city staff, often through Sarah, and then it'll eventually come to the city council for review and comment. And when we're doing a lot of these land use variances, or when we're asking for a subdivision or development, we'll have to hold a public hearing on the proposed development to allow individuals of the public to come and comment as well too.
And I'll just add, with the development process, we may see some of this come forward, with the completion of the sewer project in the next coming couple years. There's a lot of, staff work, meetings and things that happen before, as they're framing this up, they'll usually reach out, we'll go over the code, we'll talk about some of the areas where things are at and so forth. So there's a lot that goes into some of these processes, especially when we do larger, housing developments and such. So, you probably will hear about it months before anything actually comes forward to the council. So it can be quite time consuming, and there's a lot that goes into it.
And lastly, we want to touch on personnel. As Sarah mentioned, that the council has the authority to hire and fire, and so that's where we need the council supervision and direction when it often comes to personnel times. But there's a few things that you want to be mindful of as we're moving forward with personnel. And the first one is exempt versus non-exempt. So this typically applies to those individuals that are eligible for overtime. And an easiest way to think of this, I think, is salary versus non-salaried employees. So overtime provisions do not apply to exempt employees who are typically salaried employees, and those would include professional staff, administrative executives, and computer employers. Now, the unique thing to cities that they can offer comp time, but they have to offer it at the overtime rate. So certain employees will be eligible, instead of taking the overtime pay, to use it as compensatory time at time and a half, to be used as a later date as well too. Now, this would likely be part of a personnel policy if the employee isn't eligible to that. But it's important to keep in mind too that if any of the employees that might be utilizing comp time are also part of the union negotiation or the union handbook would take precedence over the personnel handbook as well too. And then that brings us right into union versus non-union employees. So I believe the police department is the only department that is actually unionized within the city. And because they're unionized, they do take part in the collective bargaining agreement and the process with negotiations with the city as well. And just like with comp time, the provisions of the union contract will prevail over the personnel agreement or personnel policy. And this is where also we see the grievance process. Now, a grievance policy really just provides a formal structure for employees to bring issues related to the application, meaning, or interpretation of their contract to get interpreted. And sometimes that's in front of city staff, it can be in front of union personnel as well, but this is where we would see that come up. And then this is also where the fair share fee applies. So unions cannot require each employee to be a part of their union. But if an employee is not a part of the union, they would still have to pay the fair share fee, and that would just be a percentage of the union dues then. Is there anything else we want to touch on with unions? It's really a large area that we would do.
And it's usually the union stuff here, that will be delegated, the initial stuff delegated to the personnel committee, and we'll work through that process, and then it comes to council when it's, more put together. We have some of those final, items prepared. So most of the time we deal with it on the personnel committee level.
The important thing when it comes to the union employees though, is that we would really discourage you about discussing employment issues with those employees or with others, because certain provisions of the collective bargaining agreement would come into play, and we just don't want any of those provisions to be violated by having improper conversations or discussions at any time. So then FMLA, that is certainly some benefits that are available to city employees as well too. They can offer time for sick leave if necessary, or just even leaves of absence. Is there any provision specific we'd want to touch on?
No, it applies and it has been utilized.
Yeah.
So,
And veterans preference and military leave as well too. So if any staff need to leave for military reasons, or if they need any care because of their veteran status, the city would certainly honor that too if it's applicable.
Yeah, and when we, like veterans preference, for example, you know, at the staff level, and we will, advise you of that when we're scoring applications and what needs to be done and how that needs to be handled. The same with military leave. It kind of falls under the HR umbrella that we have to deal with. And, you know, we just follow the provisions that are laid out by law.
The veterans preference does also, so it talks about hiring, but there's also some special provisions that apply if you have to terminate a veteran. There's a additional process to go through to ensure that they're treated properly, and that's all just straight out of state law.
Yeah, and that's they have like a hearing, correct?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so, yeah, it's just kind of wrapping up. There's some additional resources, so if you do have any questions, the League of Minnesota Cities does provide a very comprehensive handbook that you can refer to as well. As it notes, there's a resource library, there's bulletins, there's listservs you can sign up to as well that will keep you informed.
And then Alan did a little YouTube on funny moments of city council meetings if you wanna Google that.
I haven't seen that yet, so I might have to. So is there any questions?
I guess, military leave, that's pretty cut and dry, correct? Even if, let's say, a hypothetical question where an employee asks for a special assignment, and then shouldn't that employee ask the supervisor before he asks for a special assignment on military leave?
And they get issued papers, you deal with the papers that the military issues that individual. There's there's not a requirement that they seek permission from you.
Beforehand?
No.
Okay.
Anyone else have questions? Thank you. Number 5, we're gonna go to other business. Jared Griffith. Why are we getting this before us?
I'm new, Mr. Mayor, member of City Council. In your packet is, there is an agreement here for, an action on your item. And in here is the design and construction agreement for the push button system for the 23 project. This agreement consists of having a push button installed at the Broadway intersection and also the 8th Avenue intersection on 23 at the roundabout there. In this agreement, we have laid out here our design services, and they will include preparing a set of plans, specs, cost estimate, any coordination with MnDOT that would be required, and also a trunk highway 23, a trunk highway utility permit as well. Our construction services in here would be the review of shop drawings, construction staking, an RPR representative, a part-time RPR representative in the field, and a site visit from our traffic engineer. With that, our fees for this in the agreement here, lump sum design service fee for $7,300, and then an hourly construction service fee for $8,700. Is this on now? Thank you. With that, I will open up any questions you may have on the agreement.
I don't understand what, excuse me, I don't understand why this was not included in the, I mean, it says here, we followed an RFB design from a few years ago attached from MnDOT, or MnDOT reviewed it. So, at what point did this just get dropped out of the whole project?
Can I lean on Sarah Mark here for help on this one? But at some point during the preliminary discussions with the state, between that point and the actual design for the highway project, that part was dropped off, or was left behind, I guess, or dropped off, yeah.
Yep.
And when we, I guess, were brought on board for the city contract with SEH. That was for the city utility project, our sanitary and water. So that's why we are getting this out in front of you now, why it wasn't brought before. But as far as when and where that got dropped in the initial design of the actual highway project, I am not sure. Sarah,
Yeah,
Mark, do you have anything to add?
Mark and I pulled the construction meeting minutes. Very early on, it was discussed briefly, and not discussed, I mean, everything was, there was focus on the lighting, there was focusing on the sidewalks, like, it was discussed briefly, we did trace it back way early, but then it never was brought up again, and through our discussion, I think SRF, they didn't request the information, it didn't get to them. SRF is one who did the final plans. We couldn't trace back exactly where it dropped out, we just know that it was discussed, a couple years into before the project actually happened, and then just not discussed again. And even MnDOT really couldn't give us a straight answer as to what happened. But what MnDOT did indicate is the design is on us. And I think I provided the response. If it's solar, which I think one of them is that correct?
I was out there looking today. I think both of them could have potential to be solar now, yeah.
On Fourth or at the roundabout?
Fourth for sure, roundabout.
Broadway.
Broadway.
Yeah, Broadway for sure, and then the roundabout on 8th. I believe that's potential to be solar as well now with the trees being cleared for this project.
The roundabout.
And the roundabout.
Correct. So we reached out, we sent what we found, Mark found it in the file, what we had from John Halter, which you have in your packet. We sent that to MnDOT, hoping that would be enough. And MnDOT's response is in the email that I gave you a copy of. Go ahead.
That design was done when we were working on the TAP grant, right? Before the 23 project even started.
Correct, yes.
So that's why we have that stuff.
We were trying to find if we
brought
had
it up
something in the
and
files that might
we
work.
let MnDOT know we wanted it there. Somewhere after that, when they did design, it got lost.
Yeah, but I thought this was all in the Safe Ways to School grant.
We still have a responsibility for design. The actual grant will cover like the infrastructure, but we still have a responsibility to cover the cost for design. And that was reiterated. Now, the question I will still follow up on is the bonding money, because that is not restricted as much as the TAP money is. But either way, we wanted you to see this so that you knew what this is going to cost us and how, we need your direction as to
Well,
what
it's
you
gonna
wanna
cost
do.
us 60,000 is what it's gonna cost us.
So it's up to you. Jared said he could get something today done. I said, let's just get it in front of them, let's see where they're at, and let's go from there.
Can we apply for another grant for trails or Safeways?
Well, certainly you could. You're just looking out probably 5-6 years.
The construction is covered.
Yeah.
Construction.
So what is our cost then?
Design, what you got in front of you.
Design and then the construction services.
Design and for them to come out and when they put it in and so forth, to monitor it. No, the grant money and the bonding appropriation will cover the equipment itself.
So the only thing dropped from this whole thing is the design itself? I mean, everything's appropriated in this contract, isn't it?
When the grant was applied for, they included these push buttons, correct, yes. So somewhere along there between, because that was done in 2017, I believe, right?
Yeah, we
I
were
believe
awarded in
so.
17.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So somewhere between that time frame of when you were awarded that grant and then the actual start of design, it was
Well, and
roundabout.
And the interesting thing about our project is they lumped everything in. The way the MnDOT wanted it, they said everything needs to flow through MnDOT. So our TA grant, our bonding money, everything, they wanted it to go to MnDOT and then flow out that way. Whereas our other TAP stuff, we administer locally through the county and the city, working on it on our own. This one got lumped into this huge beast of a project, which is not typical how we would do the TA funding. We would normally administer it locally, so.
Well, I just wanna be assured that we're not paying twice for what we're getting.
We have not found anything in the file but from 2016, is that from? What we found was 2016, I think, an email. No,
Yeah,
and
there was
state didn't
nothing-
have anything either.
And there's nothing in the highway project that we paid for on this yet either. Is that what you're asking, Gary?
Yeah.
No, we have paid,
In,
no,
in the construction service agreement that I saw, there was nothing about these push buttons.
or even in the spreadsheet, we never paid for anything with, any of this stuff yet.
In the Schedule I? No. Mm-mm.
So you're gonna go push button at Broadway and,
And at
Roundabout.
Eighth, the roundabout, yes.
okay.
The council has that, if you're not comfortable moving forward, we can do that. I just wanted to get the information to you so we could keep this moving forward, whatever we needed to do to get it done. I do not wanna be sitting here in May and not sure what we wanna do when they're coming back, so.
Well, as far as everything on the construction is done, correct? Other than some restriping.
The bridge,
As far as the
Right,
project
but I
itself,
mean, on this Broadway and roundabout area.
the trail hasn't been paved, and then they
But
still
I'm
have.
saying not sidewalk, curbing and gutter and all that's what's gonna affect where you place these.
Yeah, there will be some part of that construction cost that should be that will be covered by the grant, will be to kind of do some rehab to some of that sidewalk. I think that's what we're referring to right now, as far as there might be some adjustments
Yeah.
to that sidewalk due to, construction of
Yep.
the installation of these, yes.
So then, with these rapid, I mean, I know a little bit about them, they gotta communicate with each other all the time too.
Mhm.
So, I don't know if the solar's gonna work. I mean,
Okay.
go ahead.
do they communicate with each other? Is that why you have?
They
the double-
have to.
No, you have the double face sign.
I know, but,
I believe this is the style you have the double face sign.
okay.
So only, that's why you're on that side.
There will be a button at each
Right.
beacon. So, I guess if they
Maybe that's more with the
communicate-
feedback
they-
signs, I'm thinking. Maybe that's more with their feedback, radar feedback signs when they gotta communicate with each other.
Yeah, I thought they only communicated one side. There's gonna be no pole wire under Broadway.
But I'm saying if I hit the button over here, both of them gotta fire.
I think it's just that's why you have a double sign.
So you're just gonna have the sign on one side of the road, not
No,
on the
there's
other?
both sides, but eastbound will have a sign facing here and here, That drawing on.
To answer your I think they, it's something I'm looking to, but I think they do. If you press the button on, say, the south side of the road,
They both
beacons
have
on
to
both
fire.
sides will flash, yeah.
That-
I just know they're expensive.
Well, and you saw at the request, I asked Jared to give us just what we need. So this is not my area of expertise,
It's not, I'm not saying it's my area of expertise either, but I deal with it a lot. Anyone else have any questions on this?
We don't have to act on this tonight, correct?
No. I guess the biggest thing is, are you gonna use anything that's existing out there as far as surface mounts? Or are we thinking about going in the ground with them, or or you're still on design phase with that?
I mean, we haven't even looked at design yet, but there are, like looking at tonight, there is that street light that is fairly close to the ped ramp would be the south side at Broadway. Now, I don't know, this is something that we need to discuss at a staff level, but usually we don't want to, after the fact, add more weight to a sign, or to a light pole. That could be something we could do, but as of now, that was just a thought when I was driving through right now.
It's a tight area to see to begin with, and it's gonna get tighter if we're hanging signs. And I know we need them, but I'm just saying, and so, if no one else has any discussion, I think we should, table this to next meeting and, get our
Okay.
ducks in order here.
Okay.
Unless we need to go ahead and just get them paid and get them started on it.
I would like to see more information.
all I ask is if there are specific questions, if you could just relay that so we make sure we get everything you need for the next meeting. That's all, just please be clear on what you would require of staff before the next meeting.
And I would add, as Sarah mentioned, I don't think tabling to next meeting is an issue at all. But as Sarah mentioned, we don't want to prolong this to like May, because the contractor or the supplier in this case did mention a lead time issue with these. So if you want to get this in the spring, when this project is still being, reopened, I guess, we do need to get on
Well,
submitting this.
one of my questions is, how long is this bid for? Are these numbers gonna go up and down like they did with the project?
Well, normally, when I buy stuff through any of these same vendor, it's good after the first of the year. It doesn't jump, the price doesn't. Go ahead.
This is not a bid, those are only estimates.
This right here is just our
Yeah, this-
contract with SCH. This has nothing to do with as far as what the supplier will be charging to install this.
This, on this page here, it's all estimated
Yep.
stuff, and this was
And that was,
2016.
yeah, that was what we
So
submitted
those
in the
are-
application
Yeah.
You know what
process.
happens since then.
Yep.
So, yeah, no, that was all estimated stuff.
Yeah,
There's
and again,
nothing They can't bid or get any, we can get rough ideas, but till we award this, for them to start to do a design on it.
but MinDOT did clarify, they will cover that with the appropriation and TAP money we have left available.
So are we installing, or are we having them install, or someone install?
They will be installed with the 23 project, so in this case, it would be Zion Electric.
Any other questions? Otherwise, I would table this to next meeting and come up with an answer then.
Is that a motion? We need a motion on that?
I don't think we need a motion. I think it's just more discussion.
Yeah,
Do we need a motion, or is this just discussion?
But
Probably motion to table it, so we bring it off the table. That would be what I would recommend, but I guess the attorneys are making.
If you take no action, there's nothing to prevent it from coming on the agenda next time.
Perfect. So we'll just put it on the agenda next time, in 2 weeks.
Did we get a quote on this actual sign, just so we know that? Does that not matter?
If MinDOT's paying, it's gonna be the least amount of money guaranteed.
well, we will be designing it. Sorry, that turned this on. So it will be designed by SCH or in the city staff. And so we can put in there kind of whatever we want, specify it however we want, so the city can get what they want out of it. If that's what you're
Yeah.
referring to there, yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
So how much money do we have left?
But these figures here aren't accurate.
No.
This is
No.
estimate that goes way back. Okay. So
Yeah, the ones that are on like page 8 or
Yeah.
whatever, the document that you have in front of you, yeah.
The good thing with
Yeah.
those, Gary, are this technology, because I deal with it, like I said, yes, the price is probably skewed, but the price is gonna be pretty close, because they've added, and then the price comes down. Because it's like anything, you get a new shiny new toy, and it's very expensive. In 6 years, everybody's got a shiny new toy, so now they got a whole bunch laying around, so that's my take on buying signs.
And like I mentioned before, the actual construction costs will vary on if we can go solar or not at both, and for both systems.
I would go solar, because they're gonna get hit, especially in the roundabout.
Broadway don't have power.
Huh?
And this,
And Broadway don't have power,
Broadway don't
so
have close power.
it's easier to fix solar.
Is the construction cost one of your questions as far as?
We thought we were paying the construction cost.
Right.
No, okay.
So we'll just pay you next meeting, maybe,
I guess.
so. All right, other business. Anyone have any other business?
If I
Go
could, I just wanted to let the council know that, next meeting, we will be having, the Economic Development Committee present, and they would like to discuss a potential grant for new welcome signs for the city. So, they're looking at applying for that art grant again that they did for the mural, but to do 2 new welcome signs. And we do know they're in bad shape, our welcome signs, and we need to do something with them. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention, to give that some thought, maybe take a look at them if you're driving out that way. They will be here in February.
Was there, excuse me, with the winery, did that get passed through at the last?
Yes, the winery did go through the joint planning board.
And did you get any more information on the industrial park inquiry?
No.
Any other business come before us?
Any inquiry on the vacant council seat?
I did receive one letter today.
Right.
I have gotten, somebody reached out with some questions, so I'm hopeful.
Yeah, which is one.
Just one.
It's early.
I've asked a few people, just that I think might be interested in, the time commitment and stuff is of concern, but we'll keep.
I have two.
Any other business? If not, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. All say yes.
Aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned. What time are we going on legislative day?
Adam, thank you.
Or what time are we leaving?
Super early. I think it doesn't start till like 10, so I don't think we have to leave till like 8. It's not super early, but it's gonna be a long night because we have dinner.
Okay.
I'll send an email though.
Tell me where you have seen crosswalk signs at a roundabout.
Where have you seen it?